Good morning. I'm really excited to be in Atlanta. How about everybody else? Yeah. I've never been before. Food's been great. I really enjoyed it. I was one of the people that put my hand up for my first Rails conference in person. So that's awesome. Really excited. Thank you all for coming out to talk about the end of legacy code. I'm Daniel. You can find me on GitHub or LinkedIn. The same thing. My Mastodon is really tiny because I don't go on there very often, but I'm really excited to talk about legacy code. And I know that's something that maybe not all of us feel. We know it when we see it. It feels kind of bad usually. So why do I like to talk about it so much? During the day, you'll find that I have the job title of Senior Software Consultant at TestDouble. On my LinkedIn, you would probably see something along the lines of aspiring technomancer and refactoring enjoyer, which are the things that I spend most of my time appreciating in this job. What I want you to care about today is that I am on a mission to end legacy code. It's a bit of a bold statement. What if we could have everything that we worked on feel fresh and new and exciting as the day that we started our Rails up for the first time? Brand new Rails app. It's probably a little naive to think, right? These giant applications that are full of convoluted complexity. It's really impossible to recapture that fresh, tabula rasa, blank slate experience, isn't it? So when we're talking about legacy code, then I think I probably need to qualify it with a definition. But before I do, let me take a look at this phonograph for a second. What does it make you think of? What does it look like? Does anyone have any descriptor words they want to shout out at me? Antique, yes. Untested. There we go. Scratchy. Yeah, that's elegant. I like that one. That's what it made me think of. I hear you, though. We see something old and we think scratchy or perhaps untested, unvalidated. But I like the way that this looks. Shiny, fresh, maintained. When we talk about legacy code, often it's in terms of this is code that was written some length of time ago. It implies that we have some sort of older version of a language or a framework that we're working with. In an outdated paradigm is kind of the implied idea. Sometimes we mean that it's in a disused language. These are kind of the descriptors that we assume that we're talking about when all of us stand around and kind of think about those icky feelings about legacy code that we're working with. I think there's an interesting problem with legacy code, and all of us in the Rails community have this really exciting opportunity where we're working in a framework that has such longevity, coming up on its 20th year, its second decade of existence. There's a lot of legacy code out there. There's a lot of things that are built into Rails that have gone through some of those descriptors that I've already used. We're lucky to have that longevity, and all of us together, and there's really exciting and smart people working on this application, on this framework, building applications together that we get to benefit from. So why then does so much of the legacy code that we see feel more like this? The bed's familiar, but it's in a dusty old room. There's a shadow underneath there. What kind of monsters are lurking in that thing? That's the stuff that makes us feel icky. So hopefully, after we're done talking, we can see that maybe what's under the bed isn't necessarily something super scary, but a little more friendly, something that we can make friends with. I think there's another type of legacy code that sneaks its way in there when we're talking about it, not some number of years ago, but other pejorative language that gets wrapped up into it. We start with things like, oh, it's tightly coupled, or it's convoluted, unclear. We start using deeper descriptions, things that aren't as good. I'm just kidding. I really do like React. It's not the tools that we're using that are bad. There's a lot of Rails stuff that is now considered old and broken, or things that we don't want to utilize anymore. Gems get the same tone too. The tools aren't bad. It's the feelings that are evoked with this. And I think what we're really talking about here is code that I don't like. We don't start there. We don't set out to write code we don't like, but we've all experienced that. It comes out of our fingers, and it's something that's not up to our standard or what we like to have. So what brings us to that point? I think there's two emotions that really drive this experience. The first one's frustration, and the second one is fear. When we start stumbling into legacy code is when we start finding the experiences of hitting our head against unclear compositions or inconsistent patterns, things that feel really bad, violate our understanding of conventions, there's convoluted dependencies, things like that, that as we're exploring code, we're walking into walls every time we turn a corner. Maybe it's untested code, maybe it's flaky when there are tests. All of that stuff, the more it piles on, the worse we feel about the code that we're digging into. And then fear happens when that frustration crystallizes. We've learned from our mistakes. We've been burned a couple too many times. It hurts to start looking at this code. We start being afraid of change. We don't want to be making changes to the application because it frustrates us. We're afraid of new requirements. Users want new things, or the product team says there's some sort of vision that we can incorporate, and that gets really scary. We're afraid of breaking things in production when we try to roll them out. We're afraid of holding the hot potato when we're on call and having to fix this stuff. Maybe we're afraid of more serious things like compliance or actual harm to people that depend on this tool that we're building in really critical parts of their lives. The more we get burned, the more afraid we are. I think there's a natural tendency for us to flip through those pages really quickly. We get into this salty mindset about things that we're working on. And I think I've seen this happen in a few different ways on some of the teams that I've been able to participate in. We start out really high morale, we're feeling really good, and the first thing we see is like, oh, wait, what is that? Kind of violates our expectations a little bit. The more we trip on that stuff, then we start thinking, ooh, okay, it's lumpy over there. Like, we're aware of some of the shape of where things don't feel good in the code base. Then we start sliding deeper into like, what the heck is going on here? There's a little bump, and there's a real tendency for us to want to avoid that stuff. If we succumb to that, or our teams succumb to that pressure to say like, hey, this thing is convoluted and we don't understand how it works, we get a little raise in our morale. We can sidestep the problems for a little while. Feels fresh and new. We're kind of capturing that blank slate feeling. But really quickly then we start tumbling down further and faster. We've introduced new, harder things to deal with alongside the thing we already don't feel good about working with. We start using things like this code is garbage, saying things like this code is garbage. We slide further into blaming the people that came before us. Who wrote this stuff? Last, we get to the disgust phase of this code is, I hate this. I hate working on this. I hate working here. I don't want this job anymore. At the end of all of this is this black hole of burnout. It sucks us in. You don't want to go back once you've hit that point. And I think that this isn't just a unique experience. All of us kind of go through this on our own, but the part of this mindset that we're in is going to impact the people that we work with as well, a lot. The teams that we are on start falling down this cascade faster together. So, I have a little bit of tough news. If you are pushing your team further along that decline, we're not doing our jobs properly. We're not conducting ourselves professionally. I think the good news is that anybody can help pick the people around them up. And you might be surprised at how little effort it takes to spark something in the people around you to overcome those pieces of fear or overcome that frustration with the code. Healthy teams are able to lift each other up to stay at the front of that curve. Now, I'm from Canada, so I had to put something Canadian in here. Everybody seen the Canadian geese flying in the triangle? They do that to help draft the wind. The ones that are rested can fly up front, break the wind for everybody else behind. So I think when we're working with those frustrations and fears, it is really normal for us to experience those emotions. We're human beings. We can't be robots. We're trying to do our best work, but we're not always going to be 100% all the time. So we need some outlets, and we need a bit of support. while we're going through those challenges. At Test Double, we have a couple Slack channels. One's called Salt, and the other one's called Yelling, all caps all the time. We can bring those frustrations that we're feeling, and we can laugh about them a little bit, which helps us clear the way then to ask why or understand what's going on and dig into the problem. So there's an ebb and a flow on teams. When you're strong and rested, you can take the point on the triangle. You can lead the way. And when you're tired or overwhelmed, draft a little bit. As teams go through this, that bond can be really motivating and powerful. Overcoming those challenges together can be really motivating for everybody on the team. And the more that happens, the more that cycle goes the other way. We slide up the morale. We stay at the front end of that curve. So, how can we be better developers, be really great to work with, and be leaders on our team where we can take the point on that triangle more often? I think this mindset of eternal onboarding is something that I've encapsulated, and I know that some people, though, hear the word onboarding, eternally onboarding, and that sounds really terrifying. To me, I imagine it's sort of like, if we can keep this rejuvenation piece, it's like a desert oasis. We're walking through the desert, we're lost. We can find a moment in the shade, get a drink of water, pick ourselves back up, and keep going on our journey. Part of this thing, when we're working on this legacy code, and I say that with the pejorative quotes, we have this idea that, like, if we could go back in time with everything that we know now, we could probably engineer a better solution, a perfect fit, something that would be perfect to work with from the beginning. And I think that context traps us a little bit, and we need to flip our thinking. If only we could go back without anything that we are stuck with knowing, getting that fresh blank slate again. When we're new, when we're no longer new, it's hard to remember what that experience is like. We underestimate the amount of complexity that we're juggling in our brains as we're working on these things. And when we're too burdened by context, it's hard to imagine what is possible. We can't unchain ourselves from the thing that exists if we're too stuck working with it all the time, if it's forefront of mind because we're afraid of it all the time. How we answer this question, what does this code do, is deeply impacted by how much context we're bringing to bear. So think about the teams that you work on. The most veteran person on your team, what would they imagine that your code does? What does your application do? How about somebody that joined your team a week ago? What do they think the application does? Somebody who left a year ago? All of those developers have a probably different idea of what the code is doing. Taking it outside of the engineering team, we've got these supports around the applications we build, QA, logging, monitoring. Those tell us very different stories about what our applications are doing. Often there's not a lot of overlap between those. Add in a third group of sales or product management, end users, people actually using our application. Is there actually overlap between how all of these different people think about what our app is doing, all the parts of it? You ever been on a team that has 100% overlap in understanding of what the application does? I mean, I'm not naive. I don't think this is actually possible. It's probably kind of like shooting for 100% test coverage, like questionably valuable. I don't think that's actually the goal we want to shoot for. But it does give us a bit of a litmus test in understanding how do our team's processes, how does our team cohesion feel, and what are our cultures doing that are supporting or failing us when we're trying to work with code that's frustrating or fearful. Ultimately, then, when we are struggling to have a cohesive understanding of the system and how it all fits together, we stumble into this world of legacy code. And then the code has to make up for those very human failings that we have on our teams. Legacy code then has sole responsibility for things that code has no right to be involved in. Let's go back to our phonograph for a second. The descriptions that y'all were sharing were things like antique and scratchy, some of the qualities of the sound. That type of quality is exactly why people in the music industry still utilize old tools like this to sample, give flavor to the things that they're working on. It informs some of the way that they choose to mix music and make it sound to recreate this experience of what music through a phonograph sounds like. But they don't rely on it to record their entire albums anymore. We're not doing a full series recorded on a phonograph. But when it's well maintained, we know that we can just drop a record on there, and if we know how to put the needle on properly, we're gonna get some cool sounds out of it. If the machine's in disrepair, though, falling apart, it's hard for us to understand how to work with it, or it might in fact just be useless to us. So legacy code, when it's falling apart that way, has to express everything that the app can do for our customers, has to encapsulate the tens or hundreds of thousands of hours of problem solving that we've solved edge cases in and express that. Legacy code then has to tell us where it's broken by itself without any support. Has to reveal business goals and objectives, what's good for our company and for us. Without support, it's sure gonna show where the limitations were, not in a fun way. We have limited resources to invest in anything, so of course the code's gonna show off when it feels bad to work with. Code then also has to be expressive of the domain knowledge and capture everything we understand about the lives that our end user lives and how they see the world. That's not the place for code to do. Ultimately, it's trying to tell us what's valuable, and there are people who spend their whole career trying to figure out what's valuable in the software we're delivering. That's not the place for our code to do. The most important part is that it has to onboard developers into all that other stuff I just said. How do we get new people thinking about this problem in this way? It's not the place for instructions for machines. It's a place for humans. So, how can we encapsulate ideas that bring that stuff back to the human realm, back to the work that we're doing as people? I think there's a few qualities that we can embody that really help with this mindset. Starting with leading with curiosity. When we're coming at it from a point of judgment, it's easy to start feeling those frustrations and fears. But if we're curious about how did this come to be, or what were the limitations around it, who designed it this way and why, those kinds of questions help us be a little more explorative. We're acting as an explorer, getting a lay of the land, the topography around us, seeing some cool stuff sometimes. Sometimes the people that designed it aren't at the company anymore, and we're acting more like an archaeologist. We're digging through our Git history or our pull requests, trying to put the pieces together from a pile of rubble. That can be really hard too. Leading with curiosity helps that feel a little more fun. Next thing we want to do is pay it forward. We want this to be an improving process, a self-improving process. And so if we can pass that along forward, that can be really impactful to the people that come after us. We don't want to just do this without thought. We want to invest in these things, and we want to return for our investment. We want to get stuff back out of the things that we're putting into this process. The last one that we want to do is put up markers behind us, trail mark along the way to where the safety is in the oasis, make it easier for other people to get there without being frustrated. In that way, we're kind of acting like a Sherpa, getting everybody up the mountain safely with their bodies and minds intact, and showing the way to some cool sights and visions. So, applying this, let's go back to the basics. Everybody has to turn on their application. It's a beautiful Monday morning today, so all of us would likely sit down and do something like bundle exec Rails S. Maybe it's more complicated than that. Just like kind of close your eyes for a second and imagine what it's like sitting down, getting going. How does that feel? Whatever the start of your workday looks like. Next, I want you to imagine, what if I told you over the weekend your laptop died and you have to start from scratch? Hold your hand up if that feels a little uncomfortable. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that doesn't feel very good when we know a brand new setup isn't going to be a great time. Maybe there's a lot of volume of services that you're putting together, or there's something like fragile or convoluted dependencies that we know that we need to build out. Maybe you need access or secret management. There's some other business process that's going to hinder you from getting going really quickly. Maybe it's just hard to seed your local database. There's some sort of really customized local dev setup. Maybe it's just a big app. All sorts of reasons that things feel bad to turn on is really gross. I'm curious about, though, how much of that feels bad because it's stuck in your brain or in somebody else's brain, and you have to remember it, have to come back to it and rediscover all that information every time you need to set up your application. Like, let's get that stuff out of our brains. If we, at the very foundation, start by, as I set up my application, take a detailed, or take a bullet list of everything that I've done to turn this thing on, I can invest that, pay it forward to somebody else. This type of stuff is really easy to overlook. We underestimate its value because it's easy. Like, we trust that everybody around us is really intelligent and can solve these problems as well. If we take the time and help make it a little easier for them, we're going to avoid kickstarting that salty mindset. If your first day at a new company is hours of like configuration and setup, the likely path is that somebody's going to start thinking, do I not belong here? Like, am I not smart enough for this? We don't want to start somebody down that path of frustration on day one. We also know that it's a good investment because you just imagine what happens when you get a new laptop. You're going to help future you too. The pieces like that project setup is ubiquitous. Everybody has to go through it at some point. Okay. Onboarding documentation is foundational. We can take it a little further. It might not surprise you to know that, given that I work somewhere called Test Double, I really enjoy test-driven development. I also know that testing sometimes is part of our legacy systems that don't feel very good to work with. And sometimes those tests are doing things that code shouldn't do. So if you're not familiar with testing, that's okay. I'd love to chat with you some more after in the hallway track. We also have some office hours, like a couple doors over from here. Happy to pair with you on some early testing exploration if that's not familiar to you. And if it's not, that's okay. Don't ignore or don't focus too much on the details of what I'm showing here. We're looking at factories as a tool for setting up our testing suite. When we're doing a brand new application in the documentation, FactoryBot shows us, yeah, you can maybe have a user in your database, might just have a first name and a last name, super easy. But over time, we start adding new things, our apps evolve. Maybe we've introduced the idea of a subscription. Everyone knows that the Ruby tier subscription is the best one. The app maybe is an optional subscription. You know, users could pay for that or not. Further over time, maybe it starts getting a little bit more convoluted. We start introducing things like a decorator around the particular user that we're utilizing, or we move into a change in how users are created during the workflow of the application. Maybe it's no longer linear. Maybe it's something like a mandatory subscription with like a limited free trial, and so we're not making users sign up. There's all sorts of reasons or product requirements that could come in that are changing, not the necessarily specifics of our code. Maybe there's a validation. Makes the code wider. It doesn't really pass the squint test as much when we're starting to see a bunch of indentation in our factory, just in our test setup. This isn't even for the code itself, right? We're adding configuration options maybe into our factories. That doesn't feel good if the code, if our test code is the only thing that is now capturing how do users get subscriptions, or how do subscriptions get attached to users. There's some depth there. Me as a new developer comes onto the team making some assumptions about users and how they're getting subscriptions on it. Maybe my first task is to fix a bug. The first thing I'm going to do is try to set up my test environment and pair those things together. And I don't know if you've worked with, if anyone else has seen this error. When you're focusing on other problems, it's really easy to stumble into some obvious traps when there's underlying complexity that we want to address. So how do we move past that? How do we know what's worth digging into, making easier? Let's think about those roles that we can take on. As we're exploring and putting the pieces together, who do we know on the team that understands how this works? Why isn't it clear or documented? Maybe there's a whole team in our company that's responsible for managing subscriptions. Like, let's go chat with them and make it so that their knowledge can be spread around to the other teams at our company a little better. Or maybe all those folks are gone, so we have to do some more work digging into those pull requests. Maybe some old Jira cards or something like that can tell us the story of where did subscriptions come from, why do they look like this, and that might help us come to a point where we can understand the problem a bit more in a bit more nuanced kind of way. Then we can think about this more like that investor piece. If subscriptions are fundamental to your business model, and that is a huge part of your revenue, then that should enable us to say, okay, let's go deep and understand why this is a bit of a convoluted pairing. Let's maybe even throw out the whole thing and start from scratch, or increment it over time into something that is a much more robust pairing between those users and their subscriptions. Maybe it's only like 2 users that have paid for a subscription ever, and we can just say, let's just like throw all this code away and just move on to something more valuable. We want to get that payback for what we're investing into it. We don't know that without some of that exploration. Last one being Sherpa. If we come across this and it's something that isn't that valuable, but it's, we want to keep it around, add some documentation, Get that stuff out of your brain, the stuff you discovered, put up those markers behind you so that whoever then has to come fix the next bug without changing the whole thing has a bit of an easier time sidestepping those frustrations that you felt and aren't falling for the obvious errors that make them feel like they're not a really good developer. Depending on our context, that exploration, we're going to be asking very different questions to different people at our company. We're going to cross thresholds or get out of our own little box that we're working in. It can also really help us reveal the gaps in processes, get us figuring out where there's flaws in how we work together as teams and as people. I think when engineers get left on their own, or there's unwieldy and obscure systems, there comes this point where we can start letting legacy code drive us around, make decisions for us, take over product cycles, lost to legacy code spilling beyond its boundaries and doing things that it has no responsibility doing. We're kind of focused on that relentless tinkering when we're left to our own, which is good. That's a good quality. That's what makes us good at solving problems and overcoming those challenges here. But sometimes it also devolves into playing code golf and bike shedding on things that feel fun to work in but aren't solving those really valuable or deep problems. I think conversely also there's sort of this perfection paralysis piece where we're trying to keep all the context in our brain all of the time, design the perfect implementation at all times, and that stops us from making forward progress, making that forward momentum. Keeps us tied to the context that we live with. So, as we discover these things, how can we start picking up people around us so that it's not just a tiny oasis in the desert, but a full-fledged jungle? There's a whole lot of things that teams do to help each other draft and take point. These mindset pieces can help drive us there, but as we're going further, we can do things like pairing. If you've never paired with people before at your job, it's awesome, and you should totally do it, especially when you're coming across a whole part of the system you've never seen before. You should also, if you're in a position, encourage everybody else around you to reach out across teams and share that knowledge across boundaries in your organization. Share that knowledge amongst the crowd. Go deeper into the tools that you have, your Git history, your PRs. Get better at writing them. Pull requests aren't for us today, for the review that you're doing now. It's for me in 10 years when I come across this problem later and need to go further in through that archaeology and that history. Those team rituals that we can do can also really help this. Retrospectives and having everybody involved in that backlog process. Get everybody involved in those things and understand how those work. I don't have time to tell you about how to do all that stuff really well. You all are really smart and can do those yourself. But don't underestimate the value of those social strengths and those bonds that come from building those processes better and overcoming that frustration together as a team. Really what we want to do is go boldly into parts of the code that we're unfamiliar with. Enabling teams to stay out of that black hole of burnout lets us chart our own destiny, change course, go different ways. We're trying to enable change in our application. Coming at it with exploration and paying it forward, putting up trail markers, is going to help take pressure off the code so that it doesn't have to do all that stuff that code just isn't good at doing. Got to get that knowledge out of our brains, tracked somewhere else, spread across multiple people. And really it's going to help prepare us for the marathon that is working with old big systems that are convoluted and complex. All of us know that it's hard and it's a long journey. There's more and more Rails applications that are moving beyond a decade of their life, which means there's also a lot of really important work to do to make sure that they are a polished, shiny phonograph and not a piece of junk that's thrown out back. We want to maintain them and keep them going, bring them back from the brink. So if you're struggling somewhere on this decline, I'd love to chat with you. Feel free to come talk to me after, connect with me on LinkedIn or Slack or somewhere. We'll chat about it. I'm really excited. If you and your whole team is really struggling with this, Testable can support. Feel free to reach out. I'll share these slides as well in the Slack. There's some stuff that really influences me and drove some of this conference talk. And the last thing that I'll say also is that not everything is about technology. So if you're really interested in conversations like this one, putting the people first, and are interested in finding more of a community around that, some folks at Testable are also really interested in having those kinds of conversations. Hopefully over time, all of us can continue building applications and maintaining our Rails applications in a way that we can get rid of that legacy code that feels bad and just enjoy all the time going forward together. Thank you so much. I think I have like a minute for questions, if anyone, or comments. For sure. What motivated me to, or what was a specific motivator for giving this talk? I don't have like a comp sci degree. I came from a communications background. Maybe that's why I'm a consultant. And when I was I did a boot camp, and I was super in love with like the trendy new fresh JavaScript framework of the day, and hence my like pot shots at React, which I do love, genuinely. My first like real job after was at a consulting company, and we were helping maintain a system for an arts organization, a not-for-profit. It was a 14-year-old Rails application with a 2-year-old React front end, and it was overwhelming. As a junior that had come out of a boot camp, I felt totally unprepared in every way for diving deep into that application. And these are the things that helped me get better at working in that big monstrosity, but also made it easier for everybody else around me to work on it. Helped me step up and find that camaraderie in the frustration and overcome those pieces with the people around me. And it didn't take that much, surprisingly, to get people thinking a different way and feeling less frustrated about all these roadblocks that we were hitting. And we could have a good laugh about it and have a coffee and then think about, hey, remember that time that this thing happened and it blew up in production? That was great. Thank you, yeah. Oh, interesting, yeah. The question is, how do you go from necessarily like a get blame to finding the pull request that it's attached to or tapping into those other parts of the history with it? I lean on JetBrains IDEs a lot, which helps pull some of those pieces out for you. Looking through our GitHub history or whatever your repository place is, it's sometimes really hard. Like if there's not been a great process at different organizations about tying specific pull requests to pieces of functionality, we can get lost a little bit. So I know that what I lean on is a pay tool, and not everybody wants to do that. Maybe we can chat about it some more after. Yeah, sure. So if I understand your question, how do we know when we come across this legacy code that feels bad and we're trying to get rid of it? When do we just take some time in the work that we're doing now, do some refactoring up front, versus when do we say, well, hit the brakes, we need to spend some time together as a team or like take a bigger initiative on this? Yeah, okay. Yeah, yeah. So I think the first one is thinking about that investment. Is this something that's actually valuable in the whole application? Is it central to everything that we're working on? Is it enabling a whole lot of other work at our organization? If that's the case, and it's super broken, then maybe there's room for us to step up with our team and say like, hey, this is a real problem. All of us are hitting it. Maybe that's time for a retro or something like that, where we can sit down and chunk down the problem together. Who else is experiencing this? Who else is hitting this brick wall? And digging deeper into the underlying problem. Is this the problem? Is it the model? Is it the pieces around it? Is there some architecture challenges? That's where we can find, when we know it's really valuable to the application, that's when we really want to go deep, versus when it just kind of feels bad because you stubbed your toe on it, but it's kind of a corner in the application, or like your Git blame on it is like somebody hasn't changed this code for 4 years or longer, or the age varies, like don't take that number as a fact or anything. But if we're looking at the Git history and it hasn't been touched in ages and it mostly works, then you probably just want to like focus on, okay, how do I like put on the blinders a little bit and ignore all of the garbage in this room and just like get that thing done. So it's really a nuanced thing, right? Like an intuition piece. It's a good question though. Love to chat more about it later. At the back.
Yeah,
that's true, yeah. Okay, so if I understand, when we're talking about getting things out of our brain, that can be a really complicated process because every team has different tools or different places that we're storing information. When we shove something into Notion, it's really easy for it to disappear forever. And it does that on any tool that you utilize. So the most important part is like, where does your team already, where are you at now? How does that information circulate today? That's a good place to start. I don't think a solid, fast, and true answer that I'm gonna stand and say like, yeah, every team needs to use Notion and use it in this way. It's a great tool if you understand the ways that the people around you are already working. And tapping into that kind of natural dynamic is a great starting point. then we can start saying, we understand how this team is communicating and functions. Let's start making meaningful adjustments or tweaks, or moving us closer to a direction where that information is discoverable. So we tell our different clients very different things depending on what they have going on, meeting your team where it's at. Internally, we just did a whole thing around info discoverability and making all of our own stuff come out, and it's really reflective of our business model and our internal team structure. So that's, I think, the piece where we need our documentation and the stuff that we're offloading out of our brains needs to really match the culture of the organization that we're in and be intuitive along those lines. So that's not an easy answer, right? Yeah. Hey.
Just because they've been here a year long.
You nailed it right at the end. So the question's about how do we as junior or early career developers feel emboldened and confident in stepping outside of looking at the code as it is, kind of staying in our lane, so to speak, and reaching out to get deeper understanding or support, or putting our opinions out there. Am I understanding? Yeah, okay. So at the end you said, how did you phrase it at the end? Okay. So there's a bit of a starstruck piece when you're an early career dev who's like working with somebody you really respect. They're like, oh, they're so smart. They know everything, which just is never the case. They're gonna have blind spots too. So I think knowing that everybody has to go through this process of, like, when we're working in a big system, discovering pain points, things that feel bad, and then tripping on them and learning from them. And senior developers have just tripped on more things than us on a project. So when those seniors are really good about distributing that knowledge or putting up the sign markers behind them, they can be really approachable. And I love sharing code that I have done or solutions that I've implemented with anybody who's curious about it, in part because if I can explain it or teach it in a way, then my own understanding is more solid. If I can communicate that idea, it validates that somebody else can come and, like, work through this code and understand it. And if they can't, then there's a problem with what I've done and it's not clear. We need to improve that piece of it. So I think there's some bravery that it takes as an early career dev to jump out of the safety box of where you feel confident and secure. And the more you can encourage yourself to do that, the stronger and faster you're gonna get outside of that and be more confident diving into things that are unfamiliar. Yeah, I wanna say more about that, but I'm probably out of time. Yeah, thank you all so much. I'm looking forward to chatting with all of you. I'm now not nervous because my talk is over, so I'll be super chill the rest of the conference, and I'm looking forward to a conversation. Thank you all so much.